The morning mist hung over Windsor Castle like a gentle blanket, softening the edges of the ancient stone walls that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. Prince William stood at his office window, watching groundskeepers tend to the manicured gardens below. His fingers drummed against the windowsill, a nervous habit he'd developed over the past few years. The weight of his future crown felt heavier these days, especially when he thought about the empty space where his brother should have been standing beside him. 3 years had passed since Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties, and the silence between the brothers had grown into a canyon that seemed impossible to cross. William's days were filled with constitutional duties, charity work, and preparation for his eventual role as king, but there was always an underlying sadness that followed him like a shadow. Catherine had noticed it most during quiet family moments when his mind would wander, and she knew exactly where his thoughts went. The palace corridors felt different now. Where once there had been the sound of two brothers laughing together, planning joint initiatives, and supporting each other through the pressures of royal life, now there was only the echo of William's footsteps. Staff members who had worked with both princes often mentioned how the dynamic had changed, how meetings felt incomplete without Harry's energy and different perspective. William remembered their childhood at Kensington Palace, when they would race through these same hallways, their mother Diana chasing after them with mock stern warnings about proper royal behavior. Those memories felt like they belonged to different people now. The boys who had clung to each other after their mother's death, who had walked together behind her coffin with the weight of the world's eyes upon them, seemed like strangers to the men they had become. The rift hadn't happened overnight. It had been building for years, starting with small disagreements about royal protocols and growing into fundamental differences about what their roles should be. Harry had always been the spare to William's heir, and that dynamic had shaped both their personalities in ways they were only beginning to understand as adults. William had accepted his destiny from an early age, understanding that duty came before personal desires. Harry, however, had struggled with finding his place in a system that seemed to have predetermined every aspect of his life. The media attention had made everything worse. Every disagreement, every different approach to their work, every sign of tension was magnified and analyzed by newspapers hungry for royal drama. What might have been normal sibling disputes in any other family became front-page news that painted them as enemies rather than brothers working through complex emotions and responsibilities. William's phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from his private secretary about the upcoming Commonwealth Day service. As he scrolled through the details, he paused at a particular line about charitable organizations that would be represented. One of them was Cinnabail, the charity Harry had co-founded to help children affected by HIV and AIDS in Lesotho and Botswana. The work continued even in Harry's absence from royal duties, but William knew how much that organization meant to his brother. The memory of Harry's first trip to Lesotho came flooding back. William had been worried about his younger brother, who was struggling with his mother's death and finding purpose in his royal role. But when Harry returned from that trip, he had been transformed. His eyes held a passion and determination that William hadn't seen since before Diana died. Harry had found his calling in helping others, particularly vulnerable children who reminded him of his own pain and loss. That same passion had driven Harry to establish the Invictus Games, supporting wounded veterans who had given so much in service to their country. William had been incredibly proud of his brother's initiative and had supported the games from the beginning. Those had been better days when they worked together on causes they both cared about, when their different strengths complemented each other perfectly. Catherine appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing the gentle smile that had first captured William's heart at university. She could read his moods better than anyone, and she knew without asking what was troubling him. Setting down the tea, she joined him at the window, slipping her hand into his. "Thinking about Harry again?" she asked softly. William nodded, not trusting himself to speak immediately. Catherine had been instrumental in many attempts to bridge the gap between the brothers over the years. She understood both men well, and could see how their stubbornness and hurt pride were keeping them apart when they needed each other most. The children asked about Uncle Harry again yesterday. Catherine mentioned carefully. George wanted to know when they might see him again. This hit William particularly hard. His children had adored their uncle, and Harry had been wonderful with them. The thought of George, Charlotte, and Louis growing up without really knowing their uncle felt wrong on a fundamental level. Family should be together, especially family that had already lost so much. William's mind drifted to his father, King Charles, who had been trying to maintain relationships with both his sons while dealing with his own health challenges and the enormous responsibilities of the crown. The cancer diagnosis had been a wake-up call for everyone in the family about the precious nature of time and the importance of healing old wounds before it was too late. The palace staff had noticed the change in atmosphere since the king's diagnosis. There was a new urgency to family matters, a recognition that royal duties, while important, shouldn't come at the expense of family bonds. Queen Camilla had been particularly vocal about the need for reconciliation, having experienced her own family challenges and understanding the pain that comes from prolonged separation. William picked up his phone and stared at Harry's contact information. They had exchanged brief, formal messages about their father's condition, but nothing that addressed the deeper issues between them. The weight of being the elder brother, the future king, and the one whom many expected to make the first move toward reconciliation felt overwhelming at times. The autumn air carried the scent of changing leaves through the slightly open window. It reminded William of their boarding school days, when he and Harry would return to school after holidays, supporting each other through the challenges of education under public scrutiny. They had been a team then, understanding each other's struggles in ways that no one else could. Outside, a group of tourists gathered at the castle gates, cameras ready to capture any glimpse of royal life. William wondered what they would think if they knew about the private family drama playing out behind these walls. The public image of royal unity was carefully maintained, but the reality was far more complicated and human. His private secretary knocked and entered with the day's schedule. There were meetings with government officials, a charity engagement, and preparation for an upcoming state visit. The endless cycle of royal duties continued, but William found it harder to focus when his heart was heavy with family concerns. As the day progressed, William went through his official engagements with his usual professionalism, but those close to him could see the distraction in his eyes. During a meeting with youth charity representatives, one young person shared a story about reconciling with an estranged family member. The words hit William like a physical blow, reminding him of his own unresolved situation. That evening, as William tucked his children into bed, George asked an innocent question that stopped him in his tracks. "Daddy, why doesn't Uncle Harry come to our house anymore?" The question was asked with the straightforward curiosity of a child who didn't understand adult complications, but it pierced William's heart. Later, as he and Catherine sat in their private sitting room, the conversation inevitably turned to Harry. Catherine had been following news of Harry and Meghan's life in California through various sources, and she shared updates about their children and charitable work. It was clear that Harry was building a new life, but Catherine could see in William's eyes that he wondered if there was still room in that life for his brother. The phone call came just as William was preparing for bed. His father's voice on the other end was tired but determined. King Charles had made a decision that would change everything. He wanted to bring his sons together, and he had an idea that might work. The conversation was brief but impactful, leaving William with a mixture of hope and anxiety about what lay ahead. As William lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he thought about the boys they used to be and the men they had become. The path back to each other would not be easy, and it would require both brothers to set aside years of hurt and misunderstanding. But for the first time in a long while, William felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps their story didn't have to end in permanent separation. The castle walls that had witnessed so much royal history would soon see another chapter unfold, one that would test the bonds of brotherhood against the weight of duty tradition, and wounded pride. The question that remained was whether love and family could triumph over the forces that had driven them apart. Outside his window, the stars shone down on Windsor Castle just as they had for centuries, silent witnesses to the human dramas that played out within its walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and perhaps new opportunities for healing. William closed his eyes, holding on to the hope that somehow, some way, he and Harry could find their way back to being brothers again. The California morning sun streamed through the windows of Harry and Meghan's Montecito home, casting golden light across the breakfast table where Prince Harry sat with his young son Archie. The 4-year-old was carefully constructing a tower with his cereal pieces, completely absorbed in his architectural project. Harry watched his son with a mixture of joy and melancholy, seeing glimpses of his own childhood curiosity and wondering what stories Archie would carry about his family as he grew up. 3,000 miles away from the royal palaces he once called home, Harry had built a different kind of life. The house was filled with laughter, the sound of children playing, and the freedom to make choices based on personal values rather than centuries-old protocols. Yet despite all the peace he had found in this new chapter, there remained an ache in his chest that no amount of California's sunshine could heal. Meghan appeared in the doorway, holding their daughter Lilibet, whose bright eyes and infectious giggle could light up any room. Named after Harry's grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, Lilibet carried the weight of family history in her name while growing up in a world far removed from royal expectations. Harry often wondered what his grandmother would have thought about this new generation of royals growing up across the ocean. The morning routine was a stark contrast to the formal protocols Harry had known his entire life. There were no ladies-in-waiting, no private secretaries organizing every minute of the day, no cameras following their every move. Instead, there was normalcy mixed with the extraordinary privilege of raising children who would understand their royal heritage but weren't bound by its limitations. As Harry helped Archie finish his breakfast, his phone buzzed with a message. His heart skipped when he saw it was from his father's private secretary, requesting a call at Harry's earliest convenience. Communication with the palace had been minimal since their last visit to England for the Queen's funeral, consisting mainly of formal exchanges about health updates and major family events. The conversation with his father was brief, but loaded with emotional weight. King Charles's voice carried the fatigue of recent health challenges, but there was also a determination that Harry recognized from their childhood. The king was planning something, a gathering that would require both his sons to set aside their differences for the greater good of the family and the monarchy. After the call ended, Harry sat in his study, surrounded by pictures of his charitable work and reminders of the causes that had given his life meaning. The walls displayed images from his military service, the Invictus Games, and various humanitarian trips. These photos told the story of a man trying to honor his mother's legacy while finding his own path in the world. Meghan found him there an hour later, staring at a particular photograph from the early days of the Invictus Games. In the image, William stood beside Harry, both brothers smiling as they watched wounded veterans compete with incredible determination and joy. It had been taken during better times, when their different approaches to royal duty complemented rather than conflicted with each other. "That was a good day," Meghan said softly, recognizing the photo immediately. She had heard countless stories about the early years of the Invictus Games and how William had supported Harry's vision from the beginning. Harry nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He believed in it before anyone else did. William saw what I was trying to create and helped make it happen. The memories came flooding back. William had been the one to help Harry navigate the bureaucracy of establishing the games. He had used his influence to secure venues, attract sponsors, and give credibility to what some palace officials had initially dismissed as an ambitious but impractical idea. Those had been days when their brotherhood felt unbreakable, when they worked as a team toward common goals. Meghan sat beside her husband, taking his hand in hers. She had watched him struggle with the separation from his family, even as they built their new life together. The decision to step back from royal duties had been necessary for their mental health and their children's well-being, but it had come at an enormous emotional cost. "Tell me about when you were kids," Meghan said, knowing that sometimes talking about the good memories helped Harry process his current feelings. Harry's eyes softened as he thought back to their childhood at Kensington Palace. "We had this game we used to play. William would pretend to be the king, and I would be his trusted advisor. We'd hold court in our playroom, making grand declarations about how we would rule the kingdom with kindness and justice." He laughed softly at the memory. "Diana would find us there, wearing our makeshift crowns made from cardboard and tin foil, completely absorbed in our royal fantasy. She'd join in, playing along as our subject who needed help with various problems. Looking back, I think she was teaching us something important about service and caring for others." The conversation was interrupted by Archie running into the study, holding a drawing he had made. The artwork showed a stick-figure family, with labels written in his careful preschool handwriting. There was Daddy, Mommy, Archie, and baby Lily. But in the corner, almost as an afterthought, he had drawn another figure labeled Uncle William. Harry stared at the drawing, his heart racing. "Archie, who is Uncle William?" The 4-year-old looked up with innocent eyes. "He's Daddy's brother. Mommy showed me pictures. When can I meet him?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to the adults who had allowed grown-up complications to keep family apart. Harry looked at Meghan, seeing his own conflicted emotions reflected in her expression. They had tried to shield their children from the family tensions, but children have a way of sensing what adults try to hide. That afternoon, while the children napped, Harry found himself in the garden, tending to the vegetables they grew for the local food bank. The physical work helped him think, and today his thoughts were entirely consumed by memories of William and the complex path that had led them to this point. The brothers had been so different from early childhood, but those differences had once been strengths. William was methodical, careful, and deeply conscious of his future responsibilities. Harry was impulsive, creative, and driven by emotional connections to causes and people. Their mother had encouraged both approaches, understanding that the monarchy would benefit from different perspectives and styles. The problems had started slowly, as Harry reached adulthood and struggled to find his place in a system designed around William's eventual reign. Every decision Harry made was filtered through the lens of royal protocol and potential impact on William's future kingship. The freedom to make independent choices gradually eroded until Harry felt like a supporting character in his own life. The military had provided escape and purpose for several years. In Afghanistan, Harry was Captain Wales, judged by his actions and leadership rather than his bloodline. His fellow soldiers cared about his ability to do the job, not his position in the line of succession. Those years had been among the happiest of his life, where he felt truly useful and valued for his own merit. But even that escape had been temporary. Security concerns and media pressure had eventually forced him back into the confines of royal life, where every public appearance was analyzed and every relationship scrutinized. The Goldfish Bowl existence had become suffocating, particularly as he watched friends from the military struggle with their own transitions back to civilian life. The Invictus Games had been born from that frustration and concern for his fellow veterans. Harry had wanted to create something that showcased the incredible resilience and determination of wounded warriors, giving them a platform to inspire others while challenging perceptions about disability. The project had consumed him with positive energy and given him a sense of purpose that royal ribbon cuttings had never provided. William's support during those early days had meant everything to Harry. His brother had understood the importance of the work and had helped navigate the complex approval processes required for any new royal initiative. They had worked late into many nights, planning events and discussing how to maximize the impact of the games on public perception and veteran support. But as Harry's profile grew through his charitable work, tensions had begun to develop. Palace officials worried about the younger brother overshadowing the heir, and protocols were established to ensure proper hierarchy was maintained. Harry had felt increasingly constrained, his passion projects subjected to endless committee reviews and modifications that diluted their original vision. The introduction of Meghan into the family dynamic had accelerated these existing tensions rather than creating them. Her background as an independent, successful actress brought a different perspective to royal life, one that questioned traditional approaches and suggested new possibilities. Some family members and staff had welcomed this fresh thinking, while others had viewed it as a threat to established order. The media treatment of Meghan had been particularly painful for Harry to witness. Having grown up watching his mother endure similar scrutiny and harassment, he felt powerless to protect his wife from the same forces that had contributed to Diana's tragic end. The parallels were too obvious and too frightening to ignore. The decision to step back from royal duties hadn't been made lightly or quickly. Harry and Meghan had tried for months to find a way to continue their work while protecting their family's well-being. They had proposed various compromise arrangements, hoping to maintain their connection to the royal family while gaining some independence and privacy. But the palace machinery had proved inflexible, operating on precedents set over centuries rather than adapting to modern realities. The choice had ultimately become binary: accept the constraints and protocols that felt increasingly harmful to their mental health, or step away entirely to build a life based on their own values and priorities. The actual departure had been heartbreaking for everyone involved. Harry remembered his final conversation with William before leaving for Canada, both brothers emotional, but unable to find words that could bridge their different perspectives on duty, family, and personal happiness. They had hugged goodbye knowing that everything between them was changing, possibly forever. Now, 3 years later, Harry had built the independent life he had sought. He and Meghan had successful media partnerships that allowed them to tell stories they cared about. Their charitable work continued through the Archwell Foundation, supporting causes related to mental health, social justice, and community building. They had financial independence and the freedom to make choices based on their values rather than royal protocols. Yet the cost of that freedom was evident every time Archie asked about his royal relatives or when Harry heard news about family events from which he was absent. The success of their new life couldn't entirely fill the void left by estranged family relationships, particularly the bond with the brother who had been his closest companion through childhood trauma and adult responsibilities. As evening approached in Montecito, Harry received another message, this time directly from William. It was brief and formal, but it represented the first direct communication between the brothers in months. William was reaching out, tentatively, carefully, but with what seemed like genuine intention to bridge their divide. Harry read the message several times, analyzing every word for subtext and meaning. His heart raced with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The boy in him wanted to respond immediately with enthusiasm, but the man he had become was wary of false hopes and painful disappointments. That night, as Harry and Meghan put their children to bed, Archie asked again about Uncle William. This time, instead of deflecting the question, Harry sat down beside his son's bed and began to tell him stories about two little boys who had loved each other very much, but had grown up to disagree about important things. As Harry spoke, he realized he was also talking to himself, remembering why that relationship had mattered so much and wondering if it might be possible to rebuild something new from the foundation of their shared childhood and common loss. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but perhaps it wasn't impossible either. The ancient stones of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle held countless memories of royal celebrations and solemn ceremonies. Today, they would witness something far more private but equally significant: the first face-to-face meeting between Prince William and Prince Harry in over 2 years. King Charles had chosen this location carefully, knowing that the chapel where both brothers had experienced some of their most meaningful family moments might help bridge the emotional distance between them. William arrived first, his footsteps echoing in the empty chapel as he walked down the aisle where he had married Catherine and where Harry had wed Meghan. The irony wasn't lost on him that both ceremonies had been filled with hope and joy, celebrations of love that had promised to bring the family closer together. Instead, those occasions had marked the beginning of changes that would ultimately pull them apart. He sat in the front pew, the same seats where he and Harry had sat during their grandmother's funeral service. That day, grief had temporarily united them in shared sorrow, but even then, the underlying tensions had been evident to those who knew them well. The weight of unspoken words and unresolved conflicts had been almost tangible in the sacred space. The chapel doors opened quietly, and Harry entered with the cautious steps of someone returning to a place filled with complex emotions. He paused for a moment, taking in the familiar surroundings before his eyes found William sitting in their usual family spot. The sight of his brother, older and carrying new lines of stress around his eyes, hit Harry with unexpected force. For several seconds, neither brother moved. They simply looked at each other across the space that seemed both vast and intimate. Harry could see the weight of royal responsibility in William's bearing, the way his shoulders carried the burden of future kingship. William saw in Harry a man who had chosen a different path, but still carried the unmistakable dignity of their shared heritage. "Hello, Harry," William said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the chapel's acoustic. "Hello, William," Harry replied, moving slowly down the aisle until he reached the pew across from his brother. They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own memories of this sacred space. The last time they had been here together was for their grandfather Prince Philip's funeral, a day of profound sadness that had briefly allowed them to support each other despite their ongoing conflicts. The image of them walking together behind the coffin had given hope to many that they might find their way back to each other. William was the first to speak. "Father thought this might be a good place for us to talk. Neutral ground, but familiar." Harry nodded, understanding the psychological strategy behind the choice. He always was clever about these things. "Remember when he brought us here after we fought about the football match when we were 12? A small smile crossed William's face at the memory. "You were convinced the referee was biased against your team. You wouldn't speak to me for 3 days because I said you were being ridiculous. I was 12 and passionate about justice," Harry defended with a hint of his old humor. "Some things haven't changed much." The gentle joke broke some of the tension, allowing both brothers to breathe a little easier. They were remembering how to be themselves with each other rather than the formal representatives of opposing positions in a family conflict. William studied his brother's face, noting the changes that 3 years in California had brought. Harry looked healthier in some ways, less burdened by the constant pressure of royal scrutiny. But there was also something guarded in his expression that hadn't been there in their youth, a protective barrier that spoke to the hurt he had carried. "How are the children?" William asked, genuine warmth in his voice. Despite everything that had happened between them, his love for Harry's family remained unchanged. Harry's face lit up with pride. "Archie is incredible. He asks about you all the time, you know. He wants to know when he can meet his Uncle William properly." The words hit William harder than he had expected. "He asks about me? All the time. Meghan shows him pictures, tells him stories. He drew a picture of our family recently and included you in it, even though he's never really met you." Harry's voice carried both hope and sadness. "He knows you exist, that you matter. Children have this way of seeing through adult complications to what's really important." William felt a tightness in his chest. His own children asked similar questions about their Uncle Harry, and he had struggled with how to explain the situation without damaging their understanding of family loyalty and love. "George, Charlotte, and Louis talk about you too," William admitted. They remember the fun times before things became difficult. George especially talks about the football matches he used to have in the garden at Amber Hall. Both brothers sat with the weight of what their conflict had cost not just them, but the next generation. The children were innocent victims of adult pride and institutional pressures, missing out on relationships that should have been their birthright. Harry took a deep breath before speaking again. William, I need you to know that leaving wasn't about rejecting the family. It wasn't about rejecting you. William turned to face his brother directly. Then, help me understand, Harry, because from where I sat, it felt exactly like rejection. It felt like you were saying that everything we had worked for together wasn't worth staying for. The hurt in William's voice was raw and honest. For 3 years, he had carried the feeling that Harry's departure was a personal betrayal, a statement that their brotherhood wasn't strong enough to overcome the challenges they faced as royals. I was drowning, William, Harry said quietly. The press, the protocols, the constant criticism of Meghan, the way every decision had to be filtered through committees and tradition. I felt like I was losing myself, losing my family, losing everything that mattered to me personally. He paused, gathering his thoughts, and I felt like I couldn't talk to you about it because you were so embedded in the system, so committed to making it work. I was afraid that if I told you how bad it really was, you'd see me as weak or disloyal. William absorbed this revelation with visible emotion. You thought I wouldn't understand? Harry, I've struggled with the same pressures my entire life. The difference is that I don't have the option to walk away. I know that now, Harry said. But at the time, it felt like you had accepted everything so completely that there was no room for doubt or questioning. I felt alone in my struggles. The honesty between them was painful, but necessary. For the first time in years, they were speaking directly about their feelings rather than through intermediaries or public statements. William leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I envied you sometimes, you know. The freedom you had to choose your own path, to follow your passions without worrying about constitutional implications. The Invictus Games, your military service, even your marriage to Meghan. You got to choose based on what you wanted, not what was expected. This admission surprised Harry. He had always seen William as fully committed to his royal destiny, never considering that his brother might have moments of doubt or longing for different choices. But I also resented you for it sometimes, William continued with difficulty, because I knew that your freedom came partly from my lack of it. You could take risks and make unconventional choices because I was there to maintain the traditional path. It felt like an unfair burden distribution. The conversation was moving into territory they had never explored before, the fundamental inequality in their positions that had shaped their entire relationship. As the heir and the spare, they had lived parallel, but fundamentally different lives, even when they appeared to be walking the same path. I never thought about it that way, Harry admitted. I was so focused on my own constraints that I didn't consider how my freedom might add to your burden. They sat in contemplative silence, processing these new perspectives on their shared history. The chapel's peaceful atmosphere seemed to encourage this kind of deep reflection and honest communication. The media made everything worse, William said finally. Every difference between us was turned into a story. Every separate appearance was analyzed for signs of conflict. We were under such scrutiny that normal sibling disagreements became public dramas. Harry nodded emphatically. I hated that part. The way they pitted us against each other, created narratives about rivalry and competition. It poisoned the atmosphere around every interaction we had. Do you remember that last Christmas at Sandringham before you left? William asked. We barely spoke to each other, but the papers were full of stories about our icy relationship and analyzing our body language. I remember feeling like we were performing our brotherhood rather than living it, Harry replied. Every conversation was filtered through awareness of how it might be perceived or reported. It stopped feeling natural. The weight of external pressure on their relationship had been immense, but both brothers were beginning to recognize how they had also contributed to the breakdown through their own choices and assumptions about each other. I should have reached out more after you left, William said, his voice heavy with regret. I was hurt and angry, but I should have tried harder to maintain contact. You're still my brother, regardless of your royal status. I could have reached out too, Harry responded. I was waiting for you to make the first move, but that wasn't fair. I was the one who left. maybe the responsibility was mine to maintain the bridge. The acknowledgement of mutual responsibility marked a turning point in their conversation. Instead of focusing on who was right or wrong, they were beginning to examine how they might do better in the future. Father's diagnosis changed things for me, Williams said quietly. It made me realize how much time we might be wasting on pride and hurt feelings when we could be rebuilding our relationship. Harry's eyes filled with emotion. It scared me too. The thought that we might never have the chance to fix this, that our children might grow up not knowing each other properly. As the afternoon light began to fade through the chapel's stained glass windows, both brothers felt something shifting between them. The conversation wasn't solving all their problems, but it was creating a foundation for possible healing. "This won't be easy," Williams said, acknowledging the work that lay ahead. "There are still institutional constraints, media pressures, and years of hurt to work through. But maybe it's not impossible," Harry replied with cautious hope. "Maybe we can find a way to be brothers again, even if it looks different than it used to." The ancient chapel had witnessed another significant moment in royal history. Not a grand ceremony, but a quiet conversation between two men remembering how to see each other as family rather than representatives of opposing positions. It was only the beginning, but it was a beginning filled with possibility. 6 months had passed since that pivotal afternoon in St. George's Chapel, and the relationship between Prince William and Prince Harry was slowly, carefully being rebuilt. The process had been neither smooth nor simple, requiring patience, compromise, and a willingness from both brothers to see beyond their own perspectives. Today marked a special milestone in their journey back to each other. Harry was returning to England for a joint charitable event, their first public appearance together since the reconciliation process began. The venue was the Imperial War Museum in London, chosen specifically because it represented something both brothers cared deeply about: honoring military service and supporting veterans. The event would showcase the expansion of the Invictus Games to include family programs, something Harry had dreamed of implementing for years, but had lacked the royal platform to achieve. William's involvement had provided both the institutional support and the broader reach necessary to make this vision reality. Harry arrived at Heathrow on a commercial flight, a deliberate choice that reflected his new status while also demonstrating his commitment to approaching this reunion with humility rather than entitlement. The media attention was intense, but more respectful than it had been in years past. Both brothers had worked with their communications teams to establish clear boundaries about coverage of their reconciliation, focusing attention on their charitable work rather than personal dynamics. William met Harry at the museum's private entrance, away from the cameras, but witnessed by their shared protection officers who had worked with both princes for years. These men had watched the relationship deteriorate with professional discretion and personal sadness, knowing how much the brothers had meant to each other. Today, their relief was visible as they watched William and Harry embrace with genuine warmth. "You look well," William said, stepping back to study his brother's face. "California agrees with you." "You look tired," Harry replied with brotherly concern. "The crown weighs heavy these days." It was exactly the kind of honest, caring exchange that had characterized their best moments throughout their lives: direct, affectionate, and focused on each other's well-being rather than formal pleasantries. They walked together through the museum's halls, past displays honoring centuries of military service and sacrifice. Both men were quiet, absorbing the atmosphere and perhaps drawing strength from the reminders of duty and honor that surrounded them. Their own military service had been among the most meaningful experiences of their lives, providing purpose and brotherhood that transcended royal titles. In the preparation room, their teams had worked together seamlessly, a professional collaboration that mirrored the personal reconciliation happening between the brothers. Catherine was already there, having arrived early to oversee final arrangements. Her greeting of Harry was warm but careful, reflecting her role as both sister-in-law and protector of William's emotional well-being. "The veterans are so excited," Catherine told Harry. Many of them have followed your work since the first Invictus Games. Having both of you here together means everything to them. This reminded all three of them why they were really there, not for media coverage or public relations, but to honor people who had sacrificed tremendously in service to their country. The veterans didn't care about royal family drama. They cared about recognition, support, and programs that could help them and their families thrive after service. Meghan had chosen not to attend this particular event, a decision made jointly with Harry after careful consideration. They had agreed that this moment should focus on the brothers' relationship and their shared charitable work without additional complexities that might distract from those goals. She had sent her support and encouragement while understanding that some steps in the reconciliation process needed to happen privately between the brothers. The event began with both princes speaking to gather veterans and their families. Harry went first, his voice carrying the passion and authenticity that had always characterized his work with military communities. He spoke about the evolution of the Invictus Games, the lessons learned from wounded warriors about resilience and determination, and the importance of supporting entire families, not just the service members themselves. William followed, building on Harry's remarks while adding the perspective of someone preparing to serve as head of the armed forces. His speech was more formal in style, but equally heartfelt in content, acknowledging Harry's pioneering work while articulating the royal family's continued commitment to veteran support. The combination of their different approaches created a powerful message that resonated deeply with the audience. During the interactive portion of the event, both brothers moved naturally through the crowd, engaging with veterans and families with the practiced ease of years of royal engagements. But there was something different in their demeanor today, a relaxed confidence that came from knowing they were united in purpose rather than competing for attention or credit. One veteran, a woman who had lost both legs in Afghanistan, approached the brothers together. "Your Royal Highnesses, I wanted to thank you both. Prince Harry, the Invictus Games changed my life. Prince William, your support for military families has meant everything to my children while I was recovering." She paused, looking between them with obvious emotion. "But mostly, I wanted to say how glad I am to see you working together again. My own brothers are my closest friends, and I know how important family is, especially when you've been through difficult times." The simple honesty of her words affected both princes deeply. Here was someone who had sacrificed enormously for her country, speaking about the importance of family bonds with a wisdom that comes from facing life's hardest challenges. Her perspective reminded them of what truly mattered in life. After the formal event concluded, William and Harry found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the museum, sharing a moment of reflection about how the afternoon had unfolded. Both were emotionally drained, but satisfied with what they had accomplished together. "That felt right," Harry said simply. "Working together again, I mean. It felt like we were both doing what we're meant to do." William nodded, understanding completely. "We're better together than apart. We always have been, even when we forgot that for a while." They discussed practical matters related to expanding their collaboration, how Harry might contribute to royal charitable initiatives from his base in California, how technology could enable joint projects across time zones, how their different platforms and audiences could amplify each other's work rather than competing for attention. But more importantly, they talked about their families and their hopes for the future. William shared updates about his children's activities and achievements, while Harry spoke about Archie and Lilibet's development and their growing curiosity about their royal heritage. Both brothers expressed hope that their children could develop meaningful relationships despite the geographic distance. "I want George to know Archie properly," William said. "They're cousins, and that should matter more than anything else." "Archie asks when he can play with his cousins," Harry replied. "I think it's time we made that happen." They began planning a private family gathering, something low-key and natural that would allow the children to interact without media pressure or formal protocols. The idea of their children playing together, forming their own relationships independent of adult complications, filled both brothers with hope. As evening approached, They walked back through London streets they had traveled together countless times throughout their lives. The familiarity of the route, combined with their renewed partnership, created a sense of returning home that Harry hadn't expected to feel. He wasn't moving back to royal life, but he was reclaiming his place in the family in a way that honored both his new path and his heritage. "This doesn't solve everything," William said as they reached their waiting cars. "There will still be challenges, media speculation, institutional pressures. But we'll face them as brothers," Harry replied. "That changes everything." Their goodbye was easier this time, lacking the finality that had characterized their farewells during the years of estrangement. This felt like the beginning of regular contact rather than a rare exception to ongoing silence. Over the following weeks, their rebuilt relationship began to develop its own rhythm. They spoke regularly via video calls, sharing updates about their work and families. Harry participated virtually in some royal charitable initiatives, while William supported Invictus Games' expansion from his royal platform. Their collaboration felt natural and productive, combining their different strengths in service of shared goals. The media coverage of their reconciliation was generally positive, though both brothers remained cautious about public expectations and maintained strict boundaries about their private relationship. They had learned from past experience that too much transparency could be as damaging as too much secrecy. Catherine and Meghan began having their own conversations, working to rebuild their relationship independently of their husband's reconciliation. The sisters-in-law had always respected each other, but had been caught in the crossfire of family tensions. Now they were finding common ground as mothers and women navigating complex public roles. King Charles watched his son's renewed partnership with deep satisfaction and relief. His own health challenges had provided urgency to family healing, but the genuine warmth and collaboration he now observed gave him confidence that their bond would endure beyond crisis motivation. The monarchy would be stronger with both princes contributing their unique talents and perspectives. The children's relationships developed naturally through video calls and planned visits. George and Archie discovered shared interests in sports and adventure stories, while Charlotte delighted in teaching Lilibet new words during their virtual interactions. These innocent friendships became a source of joy and motivation for all the adults involved. 3 years after stepping back from royal duties, Harry had found a way to honor both his new life and his family heritage. The solution wasn't perfect or complete, but it was authentic and sustainable. He could be the father and husband he wanted to be while also being the brother his family needed. William, meanwhile, had gained a deeper appreciation for different approaches to royal service and family loyalty. Harry's willingness to make hard choices for his family's well-being had ultimately strengthened both their relationships and their shared commitment to meaningful charitable work. As autumn returned to England and the anniversary of their chapel conversation approached, both brothers reflected on how much had changed in such a relatively short time. The wounds of their estrangement had healed into scars that would always be visible, but no longer cause daily pain. Their story had become one of hope rather than tragedy, demonstrating that even the deepest family rifts could be healed with patience, humility, and commitment to love over pride. The little boys who had supported each other through their mother's death had become men capable of supporting each other through their own failures and forgiveness. The ancient stones of Windsor Castle looked down on a family that had weathered another storm and emerged stronger, ready to write new chapters filled with collaboration, understanding, and the enduring power of brotherhood.